Even just listening to you talk, there's something so reassuring. You just kind of go, oh, okay, that's good. So I'm very excited today because I have the great pleasure of talking to Martin Lewis, OBE. Hey, hi, Martin.
Hey, baby.
I have to say, I hadn't been on Money Saving Expert for ages. I think it's one of those sites that you go through a phase and you go, this is the best thing I've ever seen. Every decision I made in my life was basically, I had to go and check in with you before I made any decision about anything. And then I haven't been on there for a few years. I'm like, what? I've missed out on. So before we even start, I just want to say to anybody that's watching this, if you haven't been on it and anything that I asked today isn't answered, you will find the answer on moneysavingexpert.com.
Fingers crossed.
No, I mean, literally, there's a relentless amount of resources on there. But what I wanted to talk to you, and the word I wanted to bring up at the moment, which is something that I feel almost daily from the news, from other people, and that is fear. And there's so much fear around finances and losing jobs and rent and furlough and what's going to happen, uncertainty. What would be your antidote to fear?
So the first thing we need to say, we need to embrace the uncertainty. The only thing that is certain right now is the uncertainty. And because of that, what you actually have to do is not look at the externalities. You can't second guess what's going to happen to interest rates, what's going to happen to the economy. Sometimes you can't even work out what's going to happen to your own income. So we have to focus on the bits we are in control of, which is our expenditure and our bills, making sure that those are as efficient as they possibly can be, that if we need to cut back, we can. That the word of the moment is resilience, that we need to make sure our finances are resilient. And the funny thing about being in this stage of the pandemic, which when you look at it as I do from a macro big picture level, rather than everybody else who just zones in and thinks these are my circumstances. The number of people in my life who think they're the only person who's in that boat. Yeah. I've very rarely met anyone who is in the boat by themselves. I've very rarely heard of a unique, you can't help me, I'm 100 grand in debt. Well, sadly, you're not in the boat by yourself. The one I hear a lot at the moment is, funny enough, I've actually got more savings now. Well, you know what? There's 127 billion pounds of extra savings in the UK right now from people who've either been furloughed or at work, but at home and much lower expenditure. So we have a split nation. The nation is split. Just under half have actually financially, and let's not go into all the other issues, financially benefited from the last year. Quite a chunk of the same, and there's some who've had their finances move into an absolute catastrophe. So the first lesson is, if you're in the top group that you've benefited, this is the time to build your resilience in case you're not in the top group in future. This is the time to make sure you've got your savings, that your debt is as low as it possibly can be, that you've got your rainy day fund, 6 months worth of bills. All of those are important if you're in the top group. It's those who are in the catastrophic group, and you'll know I've been campaigning for the 3 million excluded in the country, whose finances have been, for short-sighted reasons, decimated and may end up on the welfare state. That's where I really struggle to give answers.
So you're struggling to give answers for them because you really don't know what's...
No, look, if we're honest, Davina, a little less than a year ago, I think it was probably early April 2020, I was contacted by a single mother whose employer wouldn't furlough her and told her she had to come into work. And she had a daughter. Forgive me, I'm going to say she was 7, but I don't know. I can't remember. But a young daughter who wasn't going to school because schools were closed. And her employer says, either you come in or I'm sacking you. And she said, but I've got to look after my daughter and I can't bring my daughter in. And she got in touch with me and she said, I don't know what to do. Unless I go to work, I can't feed my child. But I can't go to work because I have to be there with my child. And we talked about universal credit and other support mechanisms, but, she had bills and stuff. And we talked about the stuff through. And the truth of it is, I after that Twitter moment, I burst into tears at my computer. Right? Because I've been doing this for 20 years and I'm the guy people think has all the answers and has a magic wand. But there are some times, and the last year has been very much like that, when there are no right answers, when I cannot assuage the fear, when I do not have a solution. And surely Martin Lewis knows the answer. I don't mean to self-aggrandize, but that's what people say. And to tell this woman I don't have an answer, there isn't an answer, because the government subcontracted the welfare state to employers, and if employers are shit, you've got no choice, forgive the language. To be fair, I assuaged my guilt. I set up a poverty fund and raised 3 million quid for food banks on the back of it that made me feel better. So that was what I did for myself on the back. But ultimately, I can't assuage everyone's fear right now. Unfortunately, there is financial reality that some people have not been supported when they should have been supported. And there are people in that group there are not answers for. For most people there are, though. but there aren't for everyone, and we have to be realistic about that.
What about this fear around contacting big organisations and asking for help? Because when I was 17, my father taught me the greatest lesson ever, and I got myself into enormous debt. I was taking drugs at the time. I was trying to sell things to pay for drugs, but I ended up in debt. My dad had guaranteed a card for me, and I was tearing up letters, putting them in the bin. I was panicking every time something came through. And eventually my bank just said, stop, no more card. My dad got contacted and he said, right, what are you going to do about it? And I was crying my eyes out. I was going, I don't know what to do. And he said, you've got to go talk to the bank. And I was like, they're going to be so angry with me. I can't go talk to the bank. I was terrified at the bank. And he said, you call them now, made me pick up the phone. I called the bank. And he said, you ask them to go meet the bank manager when they had bank managers in those days. Yeah. I went to meet the bank manager, and she talked me through it. And I had a loan for 5 years, no card. And, I paid it off at £20 a week until I could pay it off a bit more. It made me realise that scary big organisations aren't that scary. They do want to help you get organised with your finances. So do reach out to them.
It's absolutely right. When you're in trouble, you should reach out to them. You shouldn't always accept their solution necessarily. You go to a non-profit debt counselling agency as well. But one of the funny things that happens when people come and ask me questions at my roadshows or things, and that they'll say, Company X has just done this and it's outrageous and I don't want them to do that. What do I do? And the first thing I'll say is, well, what happened when you spoke to them? And they go, I haven't spoken to them. And it's like, well, look, before you come and talk to me and say, have the conversation. Just go and have that conversation. Now, we have to be fair. With some people with mental health suffer administration anxiety, and it is a real and substantial problem. I have a charity called the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. One of the things we're doing now is doing accessibility standards, because it's really interesting. If you're partially sighted, a public service company needs to be able to communicate with you, whether in braille or audio tape or whatever it is. If you're deaf, it needs to have one of the phones that can talk to you. But if you've got a mental health problem so that you've got administration anxiety and you cannot call it, it doesn't have to have a solution. So we've created standards that they need to be able to have different solutions in place for people. But you're absolutely right. The first thing to do is just have a nice, don't see them as the enemy. Everybody assumes, and these whatevers have done this to me. And you go, well, what did they say? I haven't. Give them an opportunity to make it right. And if you're the problem, as you were at that time, you had got yourself into this problem. Burying your head in the sand is always the worst thing to do. In the days when I did money makeovers of that sense, if you went into someone who had bad debts, you'd go in and the first thing you'd do is you'd total how much debt they're in. Because until you know, you can't, and you look at the interest rate.
And people don't want to do that. You don't want to do that either, because that is the scariest thing of all, because it's always more than you think.
But this is the crucial bit. It's always more than you think. You tell them and they go, oh my God, it's awful. These things are so much worse than they were. And my answer is, you're wrong. You're wrong. Nothing has changed in the fact that I have added this up. That hasn't changed how much debt you're in at all. What has changed is we now have the beginning of tools to deal with it. So things are not worse. You just perceive them as worse. In reality, you've acknowledged that there's a problem. We can now deal with it. Now, for anyone who is in terrible debt out there watching this, Step Change, Citizens Advice Bureau, National Debt Line, and if you're struggling emotionally too, Christians Against Poverty are non-profit debt counselling agencies. And the most important thing to say is they are there to help you, not judge you. They're not going to say, why did you do that? They're not. It's not a television show, right? They're there practically to sort through and to try and relieve the issues that you have. And these days we have breathing space, and breathing space means that they can, for 6 weeks, they can put a freeze on your debts and your repayments, a non-profit debt counselling agency, to get yourself in order and to get yourself back together. And that's very important. We also have recovery space, which is one of the campaigns my charity did, which means that anyone who's in mental health crisis care automatically gets that, whether they ask for it or not, right? Which is 27,000 people a year, because staggeringly, we used to have the case where people who would come home from hospital with an anxiety condition and would get home to bailiffs. And that is not a sign of a civil society.
No.
Right. So there is talking to people, just the same as with our mental health issues, that talking helps. Communicating helps. And if you don't get what you need, this is one of those things very few people hear. And this wasn't when you would have had your debts when you were 17. In financial services regulation these days, a regulated financial services company has to treat you fairly. That's an official phrase, treat you fairly. And if it hasn't, you can take it to the financial ombudsman and say, it hasn't treated me fairly and I want you to put it right. And in fact, I was giving evidence at the Lords yesterday. We're now talking about giving them a duty of care, which is like treating you fairly on steroids.
Yeah.
So things are changing. If you're vulnerable, tell them you're vulnerable. You've got a mental health problem, explain. I've had some impulse decisions. I'm not sure what I can do. I have a mental health problem. That gets you put through to the vulnerable customer team. But don't be scared. Now, look, be careful of scammers. We're talking big, legitimate public service companies here. They have a duty and obligation to try and talk things through and not to automatically resort to telling you, right, we're calling everything in and it's all gone wrong. So don't be scared. Do talk and do get help.
I've got to say, just listening to you talk, there's something so reassuring. You just kind of go, oh, okay, that's good. And because I think I'm a recovering addict, so I go to Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and the first step is admitting you have a problem. And the relief when you say, I have a problem, and everybody doesn't run away and hate you is unbelievable. And what you've just described there is exactly that.
I have 3 tests for debt crisis. Here's your definition of debt crisis. You'll understand the third one. Number 1, can you meet the minimum payments? If you can't meet the minimum payments, you're in debt crisis. Number 2, have you got more than a year's salary as debt, not counting mortgages and student loans? So we don't count mortgages and student loans, credit card, other loans. Is it more than a year's salary? That's probably debt crisis. Number 3, does worry over your debt stop you sleeping?
Yeah.
So you don't care about the finances for the third one. If you're not sleeping, you're in debt crisis. And when people go to the debt crisis counsellors, the first thing they say to me is, slept last night. That's what matters. That's what it's all about. So many people think that my job is about being tight. It isn't. If you've got money, I'm going to show you how to live a better life so it goes further and you can enjoy it more. I don't care if you want to go and buy your Louboutins because you've saved 200 quid on your gas and electricity. If you're not in debt and that gives you maximum joy and utility, then yes, you've done it. Well done you. But when you're in debt, then cutting back and reducing that stress is what it's all about. I mean, my job, my core purpose, I see it, and we're being sort of quite serious and highfalutin here, it is about personal well-being through finance. It's not about being tight.
Okay, so if you are in very bad debt, the details of the sites and the people that you can talk to help you are going to be in the description down below. But I just want to say, don't put your head in the sand. Face up to it and ask these people in the description for help. Seek help, and that will be the start of it getting better.